What's up, guys? GRC here, finally back, kind of, with another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at my esophagus. Yeah. So a big part of the reason why this YouTube channel has been near dead for the past couple years has been my unfortunate declining health. There's the chronic migraine, the intractable chronic migraines, which are a big enough pain in the ass to deal with on their own. If anyone else has chronic migraines, my heart goes out to you. They suck a lot. Yeah, so those have been their own sort of separate issue. And then there's also been whatever's been going on with my GI tract and esophagus. But last month, I finally got a diagnosis of something called Eosinophilic esophagitis, which from this point on will just be referred to as EOE because I think you know. But this was despite the fact that I had been having regular upper endoscopies with esophageal biopsies being taken for years before the diagnosis was made. Those were all quote-unquote normal, with them, of course, finding 0 eosinophils in the esophagus, which is how the diagnosis of EOE is made, looking for eosinophils in the esophagus. They did, however, find a benign appearing esophageal stricture. In other words, the end of my esophagus just above the stomach was very tight, and the diameter, if I remember correctly, was about half of what it should have been. So it should have been about twice as wide as what it was. So they knew something was obviously going on. The big question at that point then just became, well, what the fuck is going on? And now that we have that answer, I think a more interesting question to pose is, if they were looking for that disease before, why did it take so long for it to show up? And that's a great question, and one I think I might have an answer to, or at least a theory. But first, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, and that's oh, we don't have a sponsor yet, I guess. Someone please sponsor me. No, but I really do have an answer, or at least a theory. But first, let me do just a little bit of explaining, in case someone who's watching this video right now wondering what the fuck an eosinophil is. So an eosinophil is a type of white blood cell, and it's actually often measured in a standard blood test called a complete blood count, easy for you to say, or a CBC. An elevated level of eosinophils in your blood is called eosinophilia. According to Mayo Clinic, this condition often signals the presence of parasites, allergies, or cancer, which makes sense because EOE is an allergic disorder affecting the GI tract. Okay, so that's eosinophilia, which I didn't have. To make the diagnosis of EOE, they need to find 15 or more eosinophils per high-powered field following endoscopic biopsy. And I was right on the border. They found 15 eosinophils on the most distal part of my esophagus, and I think around 12 eosinophils per high-powered field, whatever the fuck that means, in the middle area of my esophagus. Now, in a normal, healthy individual, their eosinophil count in the esophagus, and probably throughout the rest of their body, will be at 0 unless they have an infection or cancer, but then they wouldn't be healthy. So yeah, it'd be 0, especially in the esophagus. I know a lot less about the eosinophilia, you know, the elevated levels in your blood. But it's worth mentioning that your eosinophil levels can also be elevated in your esophagus if you have heartburn, which I sometimes have, but not really. Most of the time, my pain is just sort of an ache or like an irritation. But I feel like acid reflux has a very particular sensation. And maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe it's just me, but when I get acid reflux, it's usually a burp, and I can feel stuff stuff bubbling, coming back up a little, and I can almost like feel the acid splashing on my esophagus. With EOE, if the diagnosis is accurate, it feels more like it's just an ache, or like someone is like just tightening it. It's a very odd and unsettling sensation, but what I'm trying to say is I think I can differentiate the EOE pain from the heartburn pain. And I'm curious, if you have EOE or even chronic heartburn, let me know what you think, because I'm curious if I'm right about that. To treat this disorder, there's basically and currently 4 categories for which treatment can fall under. There's dietary intervention, which I was kind of already doing, but I'll talk more on that in a bit. There's dietary intervention, topical steroids, proton pump inhibitors, which are a type of antacid, and Dupixent, which is the most recently, and in fact I think the only officially FDA-approved medication for the treatment of EOE, and that's a biologic. It's kind of interesting, actually. So the topical steroids, it's actually an inhaler that you used to take for asthma. Like there's fluticasone, which is the one I have, and they just give you the regular inhaler. But instead of inhaling it like you would for asthma, so you breathe it in and it goes to your lungs, for EOE, you don't want that. You want it to basically coat your esophagus, hence the topical, although I guess it's still topical even though it's inside your body. But I think when most people think of topical steroids, they think of like, a cream you'd put on your skin or something. Anyway, that's the way I thought about it. But yeah, so with the injector, you're supposed to like spray it under your tongue and swallow it so it coats and treats the affected area of the esophagus, which I always find that kind of interesting. Like they will make a medication to treat one disorder, and then they find that it's also useful for all these other treatments. So, coming back to the $1 million question, I think there was a delay in the EOE diagnosis because I was already unknowingly self-treating my EOE with dietary intervention. It's an interesting problem to have because it's like, wait, you're telling me I need to get worse? I'm not sick enough now to make the diagnosis, so I need to make myself feel even shittier. What the fuck is that shit? That sucks, but I think it's an unfortunate truth of just the state of our medical system. And it really kind of exposes a lot of the gaps in detecting these diseases. And I guess I just got lucky enough to have a relatively new disease. I think EOE was just discovered recently in the 90s. And that also, it makes me wonder, okay, it was discovered in the 90s, but how long, who was the first person to ever be born with EOE? It's an interesting question to me, but it's one that we'll probably never know the answer of. So as I understand it, the human body can basically become allergic to almost any food, material, or substance. In patients with EOE, they typically advise you to avoid the most common allergens. These are wheat, milk, eggs, nuts, soy, fish, and shellfish. So I was already kind of following a gluten-free, mostly dairy-free. I would cheat every, 3 to 4 months, depending on, my mental state. Dairy and cheese kind of became my drug, like that's what I would use to relapse. But yeah, so I was eating gluten-free, mostly dairy-free, low FODMAP, low histamine, trying to do low tyramine. But at a certain point, it's like, yeah, I feel better in the short term, but what kind of long-term nutritional deficiencies am I going to suffer because of this stupidly insane diet that it's, at least I know in the short term, makes me feel better, but it's like, you just kind of feel screwed either way, It's like, do I eat the more nutritious food that makes me feel worse? Or do I eat the less nutritious food that I technically feel better on? It's sort of another like, what the fuck, man? Yeah, at times I just feel, dicked either way. The only one of those foods that I was consistently eating significant amounts of was nuts. And I say consistently, but it was still kind of sporadic. Like I would binge on them occasionally. I knew they made me feel worse, but I attributed that to the fact that they were high in tyramine, a common migraine trigger. Anyways, the day before my last endoscopy, which is the one that finally came back positive, I was eating copious amounts of macadamia nuts. What I would do is I would buy my own whole roasted nuts and grind them myself, and I have to tell you, that stuff is so fucking delicious. It's like liquid gold. If you're not allergic to nuts and you're not making your own nut butters, you're missing out, because that shit is, ooh. It's really good. Highly recommended. And yeah, that's basically it. I think all my other esophageal biopsies were coming back with an eosinophil count of 0 was because I wasn't eating enough of the trigger foods the day or two before my endoscopies to really register a positive test result, which I also find odd because clearly my esophagus was being affected by something. You know, it got to be half the width it should have been, or half the diameter it should have been, from something. So I think what the really important thing is with endoscopic biopsies, or at least, you know, from my own one person's experience, it seems like the timing of the endoscopies is crucial. Because my esophagus is clearly fucked. I've had complete impactions where food, not even water or any liquid, was getting down. And the worst episode I ever had of that lasted for, I think, about 4 hours, maybe 5 or 6. It happened at like, I think 9 or 10 p.m. at night. And after a couple hours, we ended up going to the emergency room. And thankfully it resolved on its own while we were waiting. I say thankfully, but you know, maybe I would have gotten a diagnosis sooner if I had a doctor look at my esophagus back then, because it was always a problem I had kind of hoped would just go away or get better on its own. And of course, that's, in my experience, never the case. I guess I was just copium. I was just telling myself, you know, wishful thinking, because I think I just couldn't deal with the stress of, I don't know. It's just another problem I didn't want to deal with, and maybe I was in denial. But I think if you know something is wrong with your body and there's, you know, clear evidence that something is wrong, but all your tests keep coming back normal, don't give up. Find a doctor that's willing to work with you and get to the bottom of your issues, because, I mean, the other option is to just accept the quality of life that you have now, and that's something I personally couldn't do, because my quality of life was so low. In a way, I felt like I was already dead, you know? It was like suicide didn't seem like that much of a bigger step to where my life was already at, you know? But that's a topic for another video. I do want to talk about my mental health struggles, because those have been just significant. Even though I think most of my health issues have been physical, the health issues have crept up and just kind of like, I don't know. I'm out of energy. I'm out of juice. That's it for this video. I hope you found it helpful. I'll see you guys in the next one. Be well.